All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Wednesday, it's hump day, so it should be a good day for me. I always say I like Wednesdays, but it was a rough day. Another terrible day in Gaza. And this is from Memo Middle East Monitor. I've used several different sources for the casualties, but I think they all pretty much come from the health ministry. So the Middle East Monitor reported 70 dead and over 300 wounded in 24 hours as of 3:22 p.m. this afternoon. That would be obviously Gaza time. So what, about 8 hours, 9 hours later there than here. So since then, though, the casualty numbers and the death count has been updated, and the report that I saw more recently was 75 at a minimum. So that's what I used in the thumbnail. But I also wanted to present this because it conforms with what we've talked about. The numbers aren't always going to be reliable. They're not going to be accurate because there are too many dead to be counted, and their numbers increase so rapidly. Israel is killing Gazans and Palestinians more generally at such a rapid rate. They're just wiping them out. They're eradicating them, that the authorities on the ground, the officials, cannot keep track. So we've talked about this again. The raw figures, the numbers themselves are so upsetting. They're so devastating that it's you know, it doesn't really paint the picture, though. It's sterile. You don't really see the human cost in numbers. Like, you can read about a baseball player and see by their batting average and their home run hit that they're a really great player, but it's not the same as actually experiencing them, watching them play. And obviously that's a very facile analogy. We're talking about death, we're talking about war, we're talking about atrocity, we're talking about genocide, what Israel's doing. But humans, we experience visually, we experience emotionally through our senses, and numbers can't tell the whole story, or even often close to it. So we'll go to this video here from Al Jazeera, and I'm not going to only rely on Al Jazeera. As reliable as Al Jazeera is, I know many folks don't, you know, they're oh, it's Al Jazeera, it's got an Arab name, you can't trust them, they're funded by Qatar or something, even though over and over we found that their reports have been accurate, they're reliable. And the Israeli media is not. The Israeli media uses that Hasbara, their propaganda is what they are. So let's go to this video. It's very upsetting. It's very, very devastating. And then I'll ask a question. I also want to hear from you, of course, at any point. 240-242-5646.
With the Israeli incursion in Rafah, we have seen pretty much a near collapse of the healthcare system. Hospitals in Rafah are no longer existent. There are only 2 field hospitals that are standing right now, providing whatever care they can to the population that remains. And so what is happening now is the Al-Aqsa Hospital, which stands pretty much alone, trying to provide critical medical services to the population. Last night was a catastrophic night with incredible bombings on Burej camp in Khan Yunis, in the middle area in Rafah. And this hospital received, in the last 24 hours, 75 patients who were dead on arrival, and well over 300 critically wounded patients. It is beyond.
So the numbers are just staggering, and you can hear the doctor reporting it, the agony, the pain in her voice, what she's observing. So terrible. And I do apologize if the audio is a little loud. I'm really trying to control it. We're having a little bit of trouble with the video and audio, but I think it's very clear. 75 Palestinians killed as of this reportage, and that's a minimum number. In other words, it's more than that, almost certainly.
And anything that myself, the Palestinian colleagues that we have here, and some medical organizations providing clinical support it's just beyond anything we can imagine. I was talking to the father of a patient who was asking me, he said, where are the humans? Where are the humans? And I'm used to emergencies, but I have to say that I broke down and he broke down as well. It's just hard to comprehend the amount of inhumanity that there is right now.
All right, so there you have it. Karen Huster, Doctors Without Borders. So true hero. And I don't think there's any gainsaying anything that she reported. Obviously, she's on the ground. She's a wholly reliable source. And you do have to ask that, where are the, she said, where are the humans? Because the people who are carrying this out, the Israeli military, are not, at this point, they've forsaken their humanity. They're monsters. And you have to say to yourself then, are we Americans monsters because we are supporting this? Because we are behind it? Because our weapons are responsible for so much of that carnage that you're seeing and hearing about? And our media, our institutions that many of us rely upon, are not telling us the whole story, are minimizing the cruelty, the human rights violations by Israel. There's something just so morally off kilter, so wrong-headed. And I'm just trying to get us to talk about this and trying to get us to a place where we'll do something. And I haven't, I feel like I'm getting nowhere. I really do. And it's so upsetting. I mean, isn't it? You want to believe, I want to believe we're good people. No, not all of us. I get it. Everyone's a mix. We're all a mix. But to be indifferent, or as many are, I'm seeing cheerleading this. I get why people who even survived the Holocaust might have committed suicide, because they're like, there isn't humanity. There aren't humans, as Dr. Huster reported in that clip. I want to get to another video. This is going to be of Democracy Now! I don't really like to use Democracy Now! Because I kind of feel like I do what Democracy Now! Does, right? Like, I discuss stories and try to analyze the news, go into detail using facts from those folks on the ground, like Dr. Huster, who's a primary source. I'd always like to use a secondary source, which is kind of what I view Democracy Now! Not that they don't do a really good job, not that they don't have tons of resources that I don't have. They have all of that. But in the end, they're kind of doing, I think, what I'm doing. Although they don't always ask the questions like, what do we do now? I'm asking, what can we do? How can we try to solve this terrible atrocity? How can we stop it? What can we do? Let me get this video up. This is going to be, of course, you're going to see Amy Goodman first. And I do want to play it because I think it's pretty instructive in terms of where we are. And also because Democracy Now! Is very reliable in facts. Now, I think they've done not as good a job as I would have liked, exposing U.S. military involvement in various crimes around the world and the way stories have been manipulated, misrepresented. They kind of, I think, fed into the Russiagate hoax, right? I mean, the hoax was not, Russiagate was the hoax, right? So they fed into the Russiagate hoax a little bit, kind of lapped it up. I know Aaron Mate from the Gray Zone has talked at length about how Democracy Now! Refused to report the evidence that claims by the U.S. military that Assad in Syria had gassed his own people, that those claims by the U.S. military were false, or they were certainly overblown, overstated. The evidence was greatly exaggerated. That, you know, Amy Goodman refused to report that. So there's some issues there. But by and large, they do a pretty good job exposing American imperialism and the crimes of it. So here, let's get to this video. Oh, I can't hear her. Let's get that up. There we go.
For the past 24 hours, as Israeli forces attack the Barej and Al-Maghazi refugee camps in central Gaza. Israeli strikes also killed 8 Palestinian police officers in Deir al-Balah on Tuesday.
So she reported, by the way, just so you know, she said 75 also. So she reiterated that 75 figure we saw earlier on the video.
One Palestinian official accused Israel of deliberately killing police officers in an effort to spread chaos in Gaza.
All right, so that's also just what Israel's doing, killing civilian authorities like police. Now, that's not Hamas. Civilian authorities, not a militia, not somebody who's targeted Israelis. Just killing an officer so that Israel, I guess, is hoping Gaza will devolve into complete chaos, into complete anarchy, and that will provide yet another pretext for the Israeli military to go in and clean house.
In an interview with Time magazine, President Biden was asked if Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Biden responded by saying, quote, "There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion." Unquote.
All right, so I'll stop it there. So Biden is saying, obviously, I'm not just going to repeat, but it's important to bear this in mind. Biden's saying, hey, Netanyahu is continuing perpetrating the genocide to keep his own power, to stay in power. So what an indictment. I mean, a totally amoral person, somebody who is using, unlike a Hitler who was, well, obviously a psychopath, sociopath, but also deluded, schizophrenic. A Hitler who really, I guess in his fevered imagination, believed Jewish people were inferior, were untermenschen, were deserving of being exterminated, and that's why he did it. What Biden is saying about Bibi is, no, he probably doesn't have any real beliefs. It's just he wants to maintain power. He doesn't want to face criminal prosecution, so he's just going to keep the killing going, the atrocities going. It's a little ironic because, you know, Biden had said there was going to be a ceasefire and Israel had agreed. He said Israel's agreed to a ceasefire. He told us that. Obviously, he was either wrong, he was misguided, misled, mistaken, or lying. But he did something. He got something wrong because obviously there ain't no ceasefire. Biden recognizing the guy, his counterpart in Israel, is a Nazi. And yet, he doesn't stop supplying that Nazi with the weaponry he's using to kill. And so many of you are telling me I have to vote for that guy, meaning Biden. I have to support him. There's something so wrong with where we are. We have lost our way as a people. All right, join me. I'd love to talk to you about this. 240-242-5646. Tell me where I'm getting it wrong. I'm sure some of you think I am. I'm sure some of you think I missed the boat completely here. So if that's your view, explain. Explain what I'm getting wrong here. Triple G, I see your text. Yes, I always have room, always have time for your calls. So please do call when you get a chance. 240-242-5646. If you want to bring up a second topic, that's fine. I prefer we stay on topic. If I'm really into what I'm discussing, I may bring you back. remember, this is open lines. This is about a dialogue for all of us. So yeah, please do call in Triple G. And I put this in the discussion, in my description of the live stream, because I thought it was such a powerful image. Again, I think that's Dr. Huster that we just heard from. The odor of blood was unbearable. It is reminiscent of a death camp. Gaza is an open air concentration camp that is now turning into a death camp. All right, let's get to my caller. I don't know if this you, Triple G. I don't know. Whoever it is, good day. Who's calling?
Hal, this is Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie, how are you today? It's great to hear from you. Thanks for checking in.
Sure, I happened to catch your show. I just want to say thank you for all your coverage of this, and I agree with you that we've lost our way. It's terrible to say things that are evidently on their face true and just have radio silent at best on your feed, in social media or wherever, so many people silent. And I especially want to thank you as an American Jew and all of my friends who are American Jews who are standing up against this despite insane pressure and insane amounts of brainwashing. It's poignant and brave, even though it shouldn't have to be brave, because this is the fact that our bombs are doing this, the fact that it's our money and our bombs that are doing it is just beyond anything, and I can't support anyone who was behind this, and I don't care what the fallout of that is. And lastly, I would say that looking around me, looking around the people that are from my family of origin, this may not be the case for everyone, but I think racism is definitely, a racial superiority thing is definitely at play here. This ability to essentially, paint Arabs as animals, lesser, the end times theology of evangelicals and all of that definitely plays in. There's so many people that I know who are quote unquote Christian who never had anything to do with Israel, who've changed their profile pictures to Israeli flags. These are not people who I've ever heard stand up for the rights and protections of Jewish people in their lives. And what's going on, this is all, it's the same thing I've been hearing a lot of my whole life from people in ignorant white Southerners, that pretty much are motivated by wanting to feel better than and aligning themselves with the people who look the most, quote unquote, like us.
Well, Stephanie, just let me jump in for a second. I'll go right back to you. But what you're saying jibes completely with what I was reading this morning. I didn't put the story in the slides, but it's relevant to what you're saying. How the European far right, such as the Le Pen party in France and other, ultra right-wing nationalist parties in Europe, are actually taking Israel's side in this tragedy that Israel, this tragic play that Israel has authored. And so people that are have made a career out of anti-Semitism, blaming the Jews in Europe for being too powerful, for causing problems, and now they're embracing Israel, and they're using it as an opportunity to try to get support from, in France, Jewish French people. And I bet you they'll have some success from the extremist Jewish population in France. But the explanation, which I think makes sense, is that if it comes down to supporting Jews versus Muslims, Jews who mostly are of European ancestry or Middle Easterners, these far-right bigots, these racists, feel less uncomfortable making common cause with Jews than with against Muslims and Arabs.
Right. The very same people that could easily be seen being anti-Semitic not 5 years ago.
Right. And to their shame, their eternal shame, many Jewish people are perfectly happy to align with them. You know, I've never bought the narrative that Trump was an anti-Semite. I don't see that, but I do think he's an Islamophobe, but not an anti-Semite. But a lot of Jewish people have embraced Trump because the only thing they seem to care about is complete support for Israel.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing is they try to confuse us with the "but Hamas" thing, right? They try to confuse us with "but Hamas." Most people I know, and myself included, are not saying that what happened on October 7th didn't deserve some kind of response. But this is not the response. And it's obviously been used as an excuse to decimate a civilian population and, in my view, enact something that was likely planned long ago in cahoots with the United States. And that gives me great sense of shame. Anyway.
What should we do before you run? We talked about the problem and how awful it is. You're very articulate, very informed. What if any? Do you have any hope for anything that we might be able to do to try to change this trajectory? As we said, we've lost our way. Maybe to find our way again.
What I'm going to say is going to be pie in the sky, namby-pamby. As progressives, we've always been pretty consistently saying, either we all get there together or we don't get there, right? Like, it goes back, and sometimes I feel like I sound like such a patriot because I keep bringing up the founding principles of the United States, which even we never have gotten to, we never have lived up to. We didn't mean them when we said them, but all men are created equal, and truly internalizing that belief and operationalizing that as policy. And I know as progressives, that's something that we fight very hard for, or have fought very hard for, until the DNC pretty much took our heads off. So, the hope, I guess, is in the students. Seeing so many students, seeing so many young people be like, you're not going to control my voice. The more they pull editorials off the student newspapers, the more the students speak out. I think that we have no choice but to push pressure on Biden, the Democrats, and the entire system. I am not for this two-party system. I won't see a multi-party system in my lifetime in the United States. So there are people who say, you have to do this for the short-term gain of how bad things will be next year or the year after, rather than think about 30 years from now. I'm like, I don't have kids, so my vote is going to be cast for 30 years from now. I want this two-party system done asunder. But all that said, I think we've just got to use what leverage we have with the youth and the progressive left on the Democratic Party. That's the only hope that Biden can essentially get in there and say, Bibi, you're about to cost me the election. I can't with this. You've got to agree to something. And then, of course, American dollars will have to flood in and rebuild the whole thing under unfair conditions and still apartheid and, demilitarization and all the 9 yards. But at least the killing will have stopped. And that's all I can think of.
Thanks so much for calling, Stephanie. I really appreciate your listening and your checking in.
Sure, Hal. Thank you for covering this.
All right, so she's going to go. There's the noise. I have to mute the phone. I'm always thinking through this stuff and making mistakes, but I should have muted her. But who cares? You heard the hang-up. But it was a great call. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I just don't like to detract from the call. So there you see it. Today, Jerusalem, it's not just Gaza. Those who say, well, how could it be? And I've heard this again. It's not genocide because not all Palestinians are being targeted, only the ones in Gaza. And we've already explained why that's a bad and ridiculous argument. Doesn't mean it's not a genocide if you're only killing one portion, one subgroup of a larger group based on geographic region. But in fact, it's clear that the Israeli Jews are targeting the entire Palestinian population, and you can see this from our Stars and Stripes magazine, the U.S. military magazine or newspaper, is saying, hey, this is what's happening in Jerusalem today. They're marching through the Palestinian area of that, that multiracial, multi-religion, multi-ethnic city Jerusalem, and they're saying, the nationalists there are saying death to the Jews. If you're looking for some kind of moral compass from the New York Times, maybe you would have thought you'd find it when you saw the headline in Nicholas Kristof's piece over the weekend here. I wouldn't have thought that because I'm not a big fan of Kristof. I know Arlen likes Kristof a lot more than I do. But I think in the end, he's kind of a pretty morally wishy-washy guy. He's a relativist. And sometimes relativism just doesn't work. Sometimes when you try to say, well, both sides have their arguments, there's good people in both Gaza and in Israel, when you say things like that, you miss the real story, which is a powerful, victimizing nation, Israel, is crushing under its boot the people of Palestine. So this is, when the headline in and of itself is absurd. How to think through the moral tangle in Gaza. Think of how absurd it would be if he had posted an article that was how to think through the moral tangle of Auschwitz, of the Nazis. It's mind-boggling because there's no moral tangle. There's just evil. There's just, as Biden himself said, yeah, Bibi's doing this to stay in power. How is that a moral tangle? There's no moral tangle. There's just evil on one side. And I am not extolling the Palestinian people. I'm certainly not praising Hamas in any way. I mean, Hamas did a really bad thing, an awful thing. But they're not doing it now. They're not killing anybody now. And even if they were, that wouldn't justify what Israel's doing. That wouldn't excuse it. Which seems to kind of sort of be Kristof's unacceptable view. It is Halitics, by the way. Please subscribe. I want to keep the conversation going with as many of you as we can. I'm going to keep doing this. You know, what else? I don't have anything else to do. This is my, you know, I guess you want to say crusade. I don't know, whatever. But this is what I'm doing. This is what I do. So I'm going to do it. But the more people that we talk to, the more we can dialogue, maybe we can solve our problems. So this is Kristof. And again, we're just going through this because I really think it explains why so many of us are really just have thrown up our hands when it comes at least to corporate media, why we don't believe it anymore, or liberal media, whatever term. So it sounds good. Oh, there's no excuse for Hamas attacking Israel on October 7 and murdering, torturing, and raping Israeli civilians. All right. Obviously, Kristof didn't get the memo, has refused to read the very, very compelling, very, very powerful reportage that has debunked the claim that Hamas was raping Israeli civilians on October 7th. There just simply is no evidence to support that claim, but it keeps getting reported because studies have shown that sexual violence, sexual crimes really activates something in our reptilian brains. And there's an inability to shed the emotional anger that we feel. So if you hear, oh, these horrible dark-skinned people raped, the white Israelis, you just can't control yourself. Oh, we've got to go get them. We got to go take care of them. That's kind of how many people react. And if you just hear the words murder, well, you're like, well, murder's really bad. It's the ultimate crime. But on the other hand, there's lots of Palestinians, in fact, many more Palestinians that Israel has been killing, including many Palestinian civilians that Israel has been killing. So, I don't know, maybe there's some moral equivalency there. But when you hear that word rape, and by the way, the corroborated sexual crimes in the back and forth, whatever you want to call it, in the war, I don't really like to call it a war because it's one side killing another, but what documented sexual crimes have been proven are by Israel of Palestinians. It's the Israeli soldiers and the Israeli police that has been confirmed to be committing the sexual crimes, not the other way around. So Christoph just gets this flat out wrong. But also to say there was no excuse for Hamas attacking Israel, it kind of does. No, it doesn't kind of. He's simply ignoring, refusing to acknowledge. And he does kind of talk about it a little bit later on, but he minimizes it. He, diminishes what Israel has done, the crimes, the ongoing small and large humiliations and dehumanization that Israel's engaging in against Palestine. Just a couple of other points. I want to go through all of them, but each side sees itself as a victim. Well, it is true that both sides see themselves as victims, but only one side is a victim, and that is Palestine. And each side is not a perpetrator. Israel is perpetrating the violence. Israel is doing the killing. Israel is doing the sexual violence. And Israel is doing the torture. We showed pictures of some Palestinians, some Gazans released, whose arms and wrists had been cruelly, bitten into by ropes and strings tied tightly around them. We know that in the mass graves, there were Palestinians that Israel had shot in the head, whose hands were tied behind their back. So Christoph's attempt to try to be the voice of reason, the voice of moderation, is completely wrong. And it's morally unacceptable. It's morally reprehensible. Finally, 18 campus protesters would do more good raising money for suffering Gazans. I love this. He's sort of like scolding the old wise head, Christoph. Oh, you young'uns, what are you doing out there protesting? Why don't you raise money instead of buying those fancy tents? And, this is one of those memes, those kind of stories that are going out there. Oh, they're using these expensive tents. I was at one encampment, and they were not fancy tents. They looked like many of them were secondhand or they were old. Kids who maybe when they were in camp, they had a tent. There was no fancy, expensive tents at that George Washington encampment. But what a nerve. What arrogance, what condescension for Christoph to tell the heroes of our time, those who are really putting their own futures at risk. We know there's been much doxing. We know that the pictures, images of some of the student protesters have been shared with corporate America, with law firms. We know that the dean of Cal Law School actually spoke out against this practice. And I have problems with the dean, remember, because he confronted the Palestinian protester at her house, but he's even said, hey, this is wrong. If people want to protest against Israel, or if they want to protest against the university support for Israel, they have every right to do that. They shouldn't be putting their own future in jeopardy, and yet that's exactly what these heroes are doing. That's what patriotism is, by the way, is making sacrifices for yourself, sacrificing, giving something up. How dare Christoph scold those who are really trying to make things a little bit better. By the way, Catherine, thanks for the love. Really appreciate it. That means an awful lot to me. Yeah. So I'm going to move to a second story. We spent a little over a half hour on Israel, Gaza, and I try to open every one of my shows now, every one of my live streams talking about the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, the atrocities, the massacres that Israel is practicing in Gaza. But there's other things going on in the world. And a lot of those other stories are really depressing, disheartening as well. This one I kind of mixed on. So I mentioned this, I guess, Monday. I don't think we talked about it with Arlen. I did mention it with Arlen. I don't think I talked about it yesterday. I was really interested. And, you know, I mentioned this. I did visit Mexico for the first time in my life earlier this year. I really enjoyed it. I really liked Mexico. I have to say, I really liked it there. There were things that were, you know, it's poorer. It's definitely different than the United States. I mean, there are plenty of very impoverished areas in America. But you can feel, I felt that I was in, you know, what they call it, second world, developing, but not fully developed. I think the income maybe is around 10,000. Maybe it's a little more. I don't really know. I don't want to guess, but it's certainly not. Maybe it's like 50. Maybe it's a little more than that. But the median Mexican family is not living as well. Doesn't have as many things as the median American family. So you notice that. I really like Mexico. A lot of this article is very interesting. So very interesting. I think it's Claudia Scheinbaum, a climate scientist, kind of amazing, and she wrote some of the IPCC report, IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change. She wrote some of the reports, really powerful. Obviously, somebody who's intellectually way above just about anybody we elect in this country to any office. And I'm going to include like constitutional lawyers, like professors like Jamie Raskin. The Times doing a pretty, you know, and again, I go after the Times. I think in many ways it's corrupt. They are clearly unwilling to take on the Democratic establishment. They're part and parcel of it. They're elites. But they do tell us a lot of stuff we need to know. So for all that, you know, they're not all bad. Here's Scheinbaum on the energy sector. She wants to expand the renewable energy infrastructure, but you will also continue to support Pemex, keep it under state control, which I think is very interesting. I don't believe that government should control oil companies. I think the private sector can do that. I think what instead government should do is tax and tax and tax some more of the product so that in the end it becomes unaffordable and it puts the companies out of business. I'm not sure what the benefit is for Mexico to own Pemex. One thing I did notice about Mexican gas, because we did rent a car, can't really get around. We were in Yucatan, and I'll talk a little bit about, we'll get to that actually in this article. Gasoline is so cheap. It's cheaper there. It's one of the few places on the planet where gasoline is actually cheaper. People drive, there's cars everywhere. And that's a big reason, because it's cheap. So it may or may not be more difficult if your gas company is operated by the state. Now, there's other gas. You can get other gas too. 7-Eleven sold gas. You know, it's not just Pemex. But it was cheap. Pemex gasoline was certainly cheap, the petroleum there. So She wants to expand renewable energy infrastructure. That's good, obviously. But that said, and we've been through this, it's not enough to have all of the above. That was the Obama solution. All of the above. Renewables. And fossil fuels. No. You have to make fossil fuels unaffordable. And provide some more evidence of that. But again, this all of the above approach, we're going to support the oil company, but we're also going to expand renewables. That's not going to do it. That isn't going to solve the problem. And I think she knows that, but look, she's the president. And I say things and I know I make it sound easy, but obviously it's not. She's under a lot of pressure. But you know, you have to do what you have to do to try to save the planet, save your country. From the Times, Scheinbaum will have to balance numerous contradictory tests. Energy demands are rising, right? Because the Mexican economy is actually growing, even though there's terrible poverty. The oil company is in debt. That's because it's run by the government, which doesn't do a good job with that. It's keeping prices too low. And as I mentioned, poverty, problems through migration, immigration, the crime problem, that's our fault largely. And whoever's going to be the next president. So, yeah, she's got a lot of challenges. I think she can do it, but it really proves that often leaders, you know, may or may not succeed or fail because of their own actions. I mean, a lot of times it's just, you know, some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have thrust upon them. And same could be said for failing. Some fail, you know, some, you know, fail on their own. And some have it thrust upon them. You don't know. And this is a terrible problem, problems that Mexico faces, which are really important. It's a huge country. Very, very populous. Second most populous, obviously, North America after the United States. And is it the third largest after the U.S. and Brazil? I would guess, although maybe Argentina has more. So I want to go through her record just a little bit more because I do think it's interesting. And I think it's instructive. Kind of tells us what we can or cannot, what we should or should not be doing. So she was the mayor of Mexico City. And again, you know, I was talking about this with Arlen. Wow, they have really qualified people running for president. And she's obviously a very highly regarded climate scientist, very accomplished, not just regarded highly, but accomplished climate scientist. Her opponent, Xochitl Galvez, came up from poverty, self-made woman. We don't have that kind of candle power, that kind of quality in our candidates. And it wasn't just that they were successful in other endeavors, in other fields. Obviously, and I think this is good, Scheinbaum won because she has experience in politics. I don't think Galvez, or much less experience anyway. I think she had maybe one office in the legislature. But being mayor, it's kind of like being president. You're the executive branch. So some of the things she did: electrifying the bus fleet, huge rooftop solar array, expanding bike lanes. Those are all really good things. Again, they're insufficient. It's good. It makes the quality of life in Mexico better, takes some cars off the roads, makes the air a little cleaner, gives people alternatives, lets them exercise a little more. That's all great. But none of that will solve the problem. What solves the problem is making fossil fuels obsolete by their price, by pricing. And I thought this was very interesting. Because I mentioned I was in Yucatan, so that's where the Mayan ruins are mostly, not solely, but mostly in Mexico. So Scheinbaum criticized by environmentalists for backing the Maya train. So the Maya train was like a big deal. It hadn't yet come online when I was down there. Maybe it has now. They want to get cars off the road. They want people to take a train, not drive from the cities like Merida to the Mayan ruins, which are huge attractions. They're tourist attractions. And rightly so. They're fascinating. They're, intriguing. They're beautiful, the pyramids. They tell us about a completely different culture than our own, a completely different civilization. They're fascinating. Of course there are going to be tourist attractions. So the Maya train can bring more people to those ruins, and they can, Chichen Itza, is the most famous one, but there are many others. The train gets people off the road, which is good. It can bring more people, more in a less, harmful way, but they are cutting through the jungle, which is terrible. I get it. I can see why she would support it. Probably, I'm not a big guy in trade-offs. I want that jungle to remain as, uncut through as possible. But if you're going to have cars, that's going to cause problems too. They probably should just cut it, just build a fence around that entire southeast Mexico peninsula at some point and just say, no, this is going to be for the wildlife, but people need to survive. I personally would put the environment first, and I would tax the Mexican billionaire class, and I would ask the U.S. government to provide the kind of economic support necessary to preserve the Yucatan, which is just fascinating, beautiful. I hate to see trees cut down. I hate to see the jaguars, the balam as they called them. Balam is the Mayan word for jaguar, which was of course a holy animal. I hate to see it cut down in any way, for any reason. I'm sure the environmentalists had a good reason for saying don't do it, but that is one of those tough ones, because a train is better for the environment. Cars. U.S. always playing a damaging, harmful role in our neighbors' lives, in our neighbors' worlds, and no different here. The U.S. Oil companies, natural gas companies, pushing hard to build these LNG facilities where they can ship mass quantities of frozen or liquefied. It's funny because usually when something's frozen, it's solid, and it's liquefied because the gas is at room temperature as a gas, but they get it down to minus 100 degrees Celsius or some incredibly cold temperature, and it solidifies and becomes far, far less voluminous and easier, therefore, to ship. U.S. companies want to build the export terminals, greatly expanding the emissions and threatening sensitive ecosystems. This has got to stop. This is why we need the fossil fuels tax, and it needs to be worldwide. Because even with bike lanes, even with vast arrays of solar rooftop panels, it doesn't matter. If fossil fuels are cheap, if they're available, they will be consumed. And the consumption of them is what is destroying our planet. Only by raising the price to a point where they're no longer in any way desirable, where you cannot profit from using them because they're so friggin' expensive, will we stop. Will we finally wean ourselves from this terrible, terrible poison that's destroying our planet. I give Joe Biden, look, I'm very critical of Joe Biden. I give him a tiny bit of credit. He did put the pause, right? He, at first, greenlit all the LNG facilities on the Gulf Coast. We talked about that's like 8, 9, 10, a huge amount. And that was filling the void created by the Ukraine war, when Russian gas was largely cut off from Western Europe. And the countries there really wanted to move away from Russian products. So we were going to do well by doing bad. In other words, by fomenting endless war, by perpetuating it, by continuing to provide weaponry to Ukraine and keeping the killing going there, our natural gas companies would make enormous profits. And Joe Biden was all in on that until there was a lot of pressure from environmentalists. Maybe he's feeling old. He's like, hey, I'm going to die anyway. Maybe I'll do something good. He put a pause on the approval process. Many plants had already been approved. This was early this year, I believe. Maybe it was 23 when the pause was enacted. I think it was pause was imposed in the beginning of this year, 24. So that was a good thing. But he'd already done so much harm. Just like when he paused the weapon shipments to Israel for a week earlier, last month, that was a good thing, but so much harm had already been done, and now the pause is over in any event. But yeah, I give Biden grudging credit for that pause. But in the end, there's going to be demand. Fossil fuels will be consumed unless we raise the price. Unless we raise the price. Lots of comments in the chat. Great to see them. Emoji, are you on team degrowth? I think small is beautiful. I'm on team anti-poverty. I don't think we need to grow to eliminate or greatly reduce poverty. Elimination, that's a strong term, but we should be guaranteeing all have enough and none have too much. I think in the end we have to not just stop the rate of growth, we actually have to start to contract, yes. So I am, long answer, emoji, I am on team degrowth, not growth. All right, we're getting towards the end of the live stream. We've got about 5, 6, 7 more minutes left. I just don't see how we can vote for Joe Biden. I can't feel good about that. I can't feel good about saying to you, Trump is so bad, you have to vote for Biden. Yes, the pause is a good thing on the approval, but so many of those LNG terminals and facilities have already come online, including some on the Pacific coast or on the Baja coast in Mexico, which is where the American natural gas will be piped. The fracked gas will be piped through Mexico to American corporation-owned plants, and then shipped to Asia, where they will do untold damage by being consumed there. It's extraordinary. We're already living through the hottest year after living through the hottest year in recorded history. And yet, we're ramping up our consumption of this toxin. Why is the fossil fuel tax the only viable solution? As solar power surges, U.S. wind is in trouble. So we are seeing a boom. It's true. We are seeing a boom in renewables. That's a good thing. This is from yesterday, NYT. And if you look kind of at that graph, if you look hard on the far right, you see what's expected in 24, an enormous surge in solar capacity, which is great. I mean, that's a good thing. And and I know some of you are going to say, I know one of you was going to say, look, see, it's Biden. See, it's the Inflation Reduction Act passed. Consuming solar power, using solar power to generate electricity does not in any way solve the climate catastrophe. Only reducing fossil fuel consumption and ultimately eliminating it can respond to that. So more and more, even if it's solar, isn't going to end the problem. And this article makes the point that, in fact, even with all the, let me transition that, even with all the solar, it's not going to solve the problem. We're not going to get to the lit targets, which, by the way, were too high anyway. In other words, they allow for too much GHG in Paris. But even if we get to them, even if we put the solar online, it's not good enough. We also need wind, because the plans for quickly shifting away from fossil fuels envision a large expansion of solar and wind. A boom in solar isn't enough. So here's my answer to that. It isn't enough because the alternative is largely fossil fuels, is largely natural gas, is petroleum, is coal. But if the alternative was nothing, either you use solar and wind or geothermal or what have you, and I don't think it should be nuclear, but that's a different story, different issue. But if we don't have enough wind and we don't have enough solar to make up for the wind power that isn't coming online, well, then people are just going to have to consume less electricity. The price is going to rise. Because the price of fossil fuels is so high, is so extraordinary, that we're not going to use it. We're talking $50 a gallon. We're talking $100 a gallon. We're talking a price that's so great that people just simply can't use it. Then it doesn't matter if you are trying to solve the climate crisis if there isn't enough wind energy. The reason they're worried that there's not enough wind is because because they'll use fossil fuels in lieu of wind if there isn't wind. Wind is supposed to replace fossil fuels. I'm saying we shouldn't count on anything to replace fossil fuels. We should simply price it out of reach. And then all the other options will be on the table. All the clean, green, renewable options will be on the table, and we will exploit them. Those of you who say, but how? Poverty, poverty, poverty. People can't afford those prices. Your point is well taken. And the answer is, again, the fossil fuels tax at some point doesn't generate enough revenues to make it up to poor, struggling, working Americans. Then we start taxing them at higher and higher rates, the rich, the powerful, the affluent. We may all have to ultimately tighten our belts a little, or we all should have to tighten our belts except for those who don't have belts at all. Finally, just want to close. I thought this was a really instructive tweet from Brianna Joy Gray, often quote. I really like her a lot. So she goes after this neo-lib Matthew Iglesias. I think he's just a terrible problem, Iglesias. He's mocking Sunrise for refusing to endorse Biden. And Iglesias, LMAO, it's really funny, laughing my you-know-what off. I hope everyone who gassed this institution with money, and coverage is proud of themselves. Because, but Trump, you have to vote for Biden. No, we've been through this. Joe Biden made the U.S., broke Trump's record for most oil and gas produced. Joe Biden used the Ukraine crisis, the Ukraine war, as a pretext to ramp up our LNG production. Joe Biden rammed through the Willow Creek project and the Mountain Valley Pipeline using the deficit phony crisis as a lever. So, no, I can't see it. And yes, I give him grudging credit for halting new LNG plant approvals. All right, great hearing from Stephanie. I so appreciate your calling and from all the comments in the section. I'll be back tomorrow, and Triple G, if you want to call me then, call me then.